Tradition criticism traces the life or history of an early idea or concept in the hands of more than one editor, composer, or writer, or in more than one segment or period of the ongoing life of the believing community. Seems like this has gotten a long way away from the truth, certainly, but they're busy tracing these traditions. There's a certain kind of thing that we can understand, probably, at any rate. But we move on. Next we have, as I put on the board here, redaction criticism. The redaction, we mean by that editing. And you know, before I start on this, there is a legitimate kind of thing that strikes me. I might be able to say, well, I believe that redaction happens here and there. And the verse I'm thinking about is Genesis 12:6. It says, Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh in Shechem. And then we're told, at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Well, that's true. How would Moses know? If Moses, as we believe, is the writer of Genesis, how would he know? Because remember, Abraham lived from about 2165, 1992, or my dates, and Moses is 1525 to 1405. There's 500 years intervening here, and it's kind of like someone was helping who knew the history from everything else and inserted that. I rather think it was Ezra. I want to call Ezra, as the Bible does, the ready scribe. And he would have gone through that, and he would have improved that just a little bit to explain to his readership that this was the case. So we'll call that maybe a good case of redaction. Now, I get into this. The definition of redaction criticism: the effort to recover the leading ideas, theological and otherwise, of those later men who pulled together and gave shape to the earlier materials. They take that too far. We may just have a hint. Redaction criticism followed on the crucial observation that the editors who had composed the larger literary units out of the smaller ones — you've got to think smaller to larger in all of this, in this whole thing. Little pieces. It's like being in your garden. You put in some seeds and you grow and grow and grow. And from smaller pieces, then we bring in larger pieces. There must be something that you could put under a microscope what would look like that. They composed the larger literary units out of the smaller ones themselves. Those people had something to say. Their editing had purpose and direction. So redaction criticism became a serious discipline in Old Testament scholarly circles in the work of Gerhard von Rath, I call him, in the early 1950s. At least we're getting a little closer. Gerhard von Rath. He wrote the commentary on Genesis in the Old Testament Library, which is a Presbyterian publication, or it comes from them. Von. If you have a von, that means you're like knighted or you're somebody important. Von Rath. Rat or Rad. See, when somebody says Gerhard von Rad, I don't think they've been to school. At any rate, early 1950. The question of redaction criticism is, why did the editor edit? What overriding problems were he and his community, bring that in, see, facing? What questions were they asking which he thought a revision or review of the principal traditions would answer? We have a question. Help us with it. Well, let's look at the traditions and how they develop. What was his guiding viewpoint in addressing himself to these concerns? And that is what we do when we talk about editors. I have another, that's to be redaction criticism. I have another car for our train. And we can put that in here. We got to have some wheels again. Another one. This is CC, or canon criticism. Canon. I'm very, very interested in the C-A-N-O-N, not three N's but two. criticism. So here we are with this one. Now, careful attention must now be given to the origins and function of the canon. What is the canon? I've already done that for you in the sense that I have told you that the canon equals the table of contents in your Bible. But you can understand that that is far too simplistic for these great scholars. So they are not content with such a statement. What is the canon? Those books that are in or out of the Bible. The thinker here was a man that I knew personally. His name is G. Ernest Wright, and we ran that across him in California, and then later on at Heshbon in Jordan. G stands for George. They always called him George Ernest. They called him GEW or George this way. He was a wonderful man. He was at Harvard. Many of the people I've worked with in archaeology were his students. These were the people who had PhDs that came out of George Ernest Wright's group. And there were many diggers that weren't his students that also came from his group. And I found them to be very, very helpful and great teachers. I learned a lot of things about digging. That's not anything to do with the theology of things. And that's what I appreciate most. He was an influential thinker here. And for him, the canon is that reigning theology. Now we've gone to contemporary theology from comparative religion. Contemporary theology, you think about it, that's something that moves along with the theological climate of opinions and so forth that come up. And we studied contemporary theology in seminary. In my day, we had the God is Dead movement in the 60s. You know, God is dead was something that they said because they weren't talking about God anymore. Sounds very strange. But it had a lot to do with neo-orthodoxy and Soren Kierkegaard and these kind of people. And really, God was not dead at all. It's just that we lost track of him on our own. So the canon is that reigning theology, contemporary theology, at any particular time in the Bible's growth. Okay, this concept extends to today in that Christian midrash or commentary continues to use the canon in finding out who and what the community is. Biblical tradition is constantly contemporized. It is a mirror for the believing community in any age. Yes, I wrote some very troubled notes here in my margin. Existentialism is what it sounds like. These are great things. Some of you are theologians. You ought to know about existentialism. I never have pretended to be a theologian. Existentialism. There are quite a few isms and asms and spasms out there that wear us all out. Existentialism. What does the community of today have to do with anything is my question. Their answer is that it is what the believing community considers true or valuable that is employed. Well, that really cuts down on the Bible. Now the people are telling the Bible what to say rather than the Bible telling the people what to say. Therefore, canonical criticism picks up with the results of tradition criticism and goes on to ask what the function or authority was of the ancient tradition in the context where cited. How was it used? Amos, for instance, cites the Exodus. How was it used? And that's the great question that they have. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is a little more painful than anything here, and that has to do with postmodernism and how it is taking its toll on biblical studies today. So we'll be back.